DAX nears record as Wall Street rally bubbles over. Markets wrap. Markets embraced optimism that leaders in Washington are nearing a deal to raise the debt ceiling, sparking a broad rally in stocks from Europe to Japan Friday. The DAX index headed for first record since January 2022. Oil was set to close out for its best week since mid-April, and the Nikkei 225 closed at a 33-year peak, as momentum carried over from Wall Street. Futures in the S&P 500 ticked higher after the gauge hit a 9-month high on Thursday. In a call early Friday from Japan, President Joe Biden told his negotiating team that he's confident Congress will act in time to avoid a default, according to a White House official. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer are making plans for votes in the coming days on a bipartisan deal. Growing optimism for a resolution to the debt ceiling negotiations has lifted sentiment, although the mood was slightly tempered by question marks over the Federal Reserve's next move on interest rates, said Richard Hunter, head of markets at Interactive Investor. Treasuries recouped some losses from a sell-off on mounting doubts the Federal Reserve will pause its credit tightening campaign next month. An index of the dollar slipped 0.3%. Chinese stocks were the outlier to Friday's risk-on mood. The Hang Seng Tech Index slumped as much as 2.4% as Alibaba Group Holding Limited dropped in the wake of disappointing sales. China's yuan recovered from an earlier loss after China's central bank vowed to curb speculation in the yuan and called for more stability in the foreign exchange market. The offshore yuan fell to the weakest level to the dollar in 6 months this week after breaching the closely watched 7 per dollar level amid the weakest fix since December. The offshore yuan extended a rise after the PBOC statement, gaining 0.5% to 7.0136 per dollar. Key events this week. ECB President Christine Lagarde participates in panel at Brazil Central Bank Conference, Friday. New York Fed's John Williams speaks at Monetary Policy Research Conference in Washington. Fed Chair Jerome Powell and former Chair Ben Bernanke to take part in
Cinq choses que vous devez savoir pour commencer votre journée. Biden garde un œil sur les pourparlers sur le Biden garde un œil sur les pourparlers sur le plafond. Biden garde un œil sur les pourparlers sur le plafond de la dette. Les États-Unis et Taïwan s'accordent sur les liens commerciaux et OpenAI apporte ChatGPT au smartphone. Lisa Tetley. Enregistrement. Le président Joe Biden se tient au courant de l'évolution de la limite de la dette à distance, exhortant les négociateurs à poursuivre la recherche d'un accord pendant qu'il assiste au sommet du G7 au Japon. Il a déclaré à son équipe de négociation triée sur le volet lors d'un appel vendredi matin qu'il était convaincu que le Congrès agirait à temps pour empêcher un défaut de paiement de la dette américaine. Son équipe a quant à elle déclaré faire des progrès constants, maintenant le sentiment d'optimisme qui a prévalu ces derniers jours sur les négociations. Le président de la Chambre, McCarthy, et le chef de la majorité au Sénat, Schumer, prévoient de voter dans les prochains jours sur un accord. Lien de Taïwan. Les États-Unis et Taïwan ont convenu de renforcer leurs relations commerciales, ce qui assombrit les perspectives d'une visite d'un responsable du commerce chinois aux États-Unis la semaine prochaine. L'initiative n'est pas un accord de libre-échange formel et ne traite pas de questions épineuses telles que les tarifs. Mais elle fait partie d'une volonté plus large d'approfondir les liens commerciaux dans un contexte de tensions accrues avec Pékin. L'accord intervient également alors que le président Biden est au Japon pour rencontrer les dirigeants des pays du groupe D7, en mettant l'accent sur la lutte contre l'influence de la Chine. Application IA. OpenAI is bringing ChatGPT to smartphone for the first time.
OpenAI is bringing ChatGPT to smartphones for the first time, releasing an OpenAI is bringing ChatGPT to smartphones for the first time, releasing an iPhone version on Thursday and with an Android version in the pipeline. The free-to-use software is available for iOS devices in the US through the App Store. OpenAI plans to offer its app in more countries in the coming weeks. Ironically, Apple is restricting internal use of ChatGPT and other AI tools just as the new app comes out due to concerns that the software could be used to release confidential data. It recently joined Samsung Electronics and other corporate giants in banning employee use of the tools. Stocks rise. Contracts on the S&P 500 and Nasdaq are edging higher this morning, with a broad rally in European stocks pushing Germany's DAX toward a record, amid cautious optimism about a potential breakthrough in U.S. debt ceiling talks. Treasury yields are muted and a measure of the dollar is weakening. Oil is gaining and gold is rebounding, trimming what's still set to be the biggest weekly slump since March. Iron is declining, snapping a 4-day streak of gains. Coming up. Aside from G7 leader meetings through Sunday in Japan, we've got some speakers today on American soil too. From the Fed, we've got Williams at 8:45 a.m., followed by Bowman at 9 a.m. At 11 a.m. we'll hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell and former Chair Ben Bernanke. A quiet day on the data front, with just Baker Hughes' U.S. rig count at 1 p.m. earnings. Include Deere, Catalent and Foot Locker, and Morgan Stanley will hold its shareholder meeting. What we've been reading. Here's what caught our eye over. Finally, there seems to be a deal in sight to raise the U.S. debt ceiling and avoid a potential unprecedented default. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said Thursday that negotiators may reach an agreement in principle as soon as this weekend, lining up a vote in his chamber next week. A deal isn't guaranteed at this point, of course. But financial markets, figuratively, breathe a sigh of relief. So is the coast clear? Not necessarily. For starters, a last-minute bargain is always expected. A J.P. Morgan Chase & Company survey showed only 2% of its clients expect a technical default. Sure, Treasury bills maturing in early June are trading at discounts, suggesting investors are reluctant to hold securities most vulnerable to the risk of a default. And credit default swaps point to demand for hedging against such risks. But for the broad market, Bien sûr, les bonds du trésor arrivent à échéance début juin se négociant des prix réduits, ce qui suggère que les investisseurs hésitent à détenir les titres les plus vulnérables au risque de défaut. Et les swaps sur défaillance de crédit indiquent une demande de couverture contre de téléphones risqués.
Et les swaps sur défaillance de crédit indiquent une demande de couverture contre de tels risques. Et les swaps sur défaillance de crédit indiquent une demande de couverture contre de tels risques. Et les swaps sur défaillance de crédit indiquent une demande de couverture contre de tels risques. Mais pour l'ensemble du marché, vous auriez du mal à trouver des preuves qu'une telle préoccupation est au premier plan de l'esprit des investisseurs. Le S&P 500 conserve son gain de 8% au cours de la dernière année, tandis qu'un indicateur de volatilité des devises est tombé au plus bas depuis mars 2022. Le S&P 500 conserve son gain de 8% au cours de la dernière année, tandis qu'un indicateur de volatilité des devises est tombé au plus bas. Donc, si les investisseurs ne sont pas terriblement préoccupés par le plafond de la dette pour commencer, sa résolution potentielle n'est guère quelque chose d'excitant. Ensuite, considérez ce qui se passe après que les législateurs ont relevé le plafond de la dette. Un accord réduisant les dépenses publiques, comme l'exigent les républicains, pourrait potentiellement freiner la croissance économique. Comme l'a dit James Attey, directeur des investissements chez Aberdeen, un accord réduisant les dépenses publiques, comme l'exigent les républicains, pourrait potentiellement freiner la croissance économique. Comme l'a dit James Attey, directeur des investissements chez Aberdeen. En outre, un accord signifie que le département du Trésor doit vendre beaucoup de bons du Trésor pour reconstituer sa réserve de trésorerie en baisse et maintenir sa capacité à payer ses obligations. Les investisseurs ne sont pas terriblement préoccupés par le plafond de la dette pour commencer. En outre, un accord signifie que le département du Trésor doit vendre beaucoup de bons du Trésor pour reconstituer sa réserve de trésorerie en baisse et maintenir sa capacité à payer ses obligations. Selon certaines estimations, cet emprunt pourrait dépasser $1 billion d'ici la fin septembre. Cela aspirerait les liquidités du secteur bancaire et resserrerait les vis de l'économie américaine. Bank of America Corp. estime que cela aurait le même impact économique qu'une hausse des taux d'intérêt d'un quart de point. En savoir plus dans The Weekly Fix, selon certaines estimations. Cet emprunt pourrait dépasser $1 billion d'ici la fin septembre. Cela aspirerait les liquidités du secteur bancaire et resserrerait les vis de l'économie américaine. Bank of America Corp. La solution hebdomadaire, un accord sur le plafond de la dette. Les problèmes ne s'arrêtent pas là. Bienvenue au Weekly Fix, la newsletter qui respecte toujours son échéance. Je suis Yi11e, journaliste spécialisé dans les obligations et l'échange, qui remplace Cathy Greffel. Temps de crise. Enfin, un accord semble être en vue pour relever le plafond de la dette américaine et éviter un éventuel défaut sans précédent. Le président de la Chambre, Kevin McCarthy, a déclaré jeudi que les négociateurs pourraient parvenir à un accord de principe dès ce week-end, alignant un vote dans sa Chambre la semaine prochaine. Un accord n'est pas garanti à ce stade, bien sûr. Mais les marchés financiers, au sens figuré, ont poussé un soupir de soulagement. Alors, la côte est-elle dégagée? Pas nécessairement. Pour commencer, une bonne affaire de dernière minute est toujours attendue. Une enquête de JP Morgan Chase & Co. a montré que seulement 2% de ses clients s'attendent à un défaut technique. Sur Treasury Bill Maturing in Early June are trading at discount, suggesting investors are reluctant to hold securities most vulnerable to the risk of a default. And credit default swap point to demand for hedging against.
And credit default swaps point to demand for hedging against such risks. Source, JP Morgan. But for the broad market, you'd be hard-pressed to find evidence that such concern is top of investors' mind. The S&P 500 is holding on to its 8% gain over the past year, while a gauge of currency volatility fell to the lowest since March 2022. So if investors aren't terribly concerned about the debt ceiling to begin with, its potential resolution is hardly something to get excited about. Then, consider what comes after lawmakers raise the debt limit. A deal reducing government spending, as Republicans demand, could potentially drag down economic growth. As James Athey, investment director at Abradon, put it, "It seems highly unlikely to me that Republicans would agree to a clean increase at this stage, which suggests that Biden is compromising, which suggests spending cuts, which suggest weaker risk assets and lower yields, exactly as was the case in 2011. Matt Levine's money stuff is what's missing from your inbox. We know you're busy. Let Bloomberg Opinions Matt. In addition, a deal means the Treasury Department needs to sell a lot of Treasury bills to replenish its dwindling cash buffer. In addition, a deal means the Treasury Department needs to sell a lot of Treasury bills to replenish its dwindling cash buffer and maintain its ability to pay obligations. By some estimates, that borrowing could top $1 trillion by the end of September. In addition, a deal means the Treasury Department needs to sell a lot of Treasury bills to replenish its dwindling cash buffer and maintain its ability to pay obligations. By some estimates, that borrowing could top $1 trillion by the end of September. That would suck liquidity from the banking sector and tighten the screws on the U.S. economy. Bank of America Corp's estimates it would have the same economic impact as a quarter-point interest rate hike. Speaking of a rate hike, avoiding financial Armageddon also means the Federal Reserve may not be done with its interest rate hikes. On Thursday, the bond market assigned about a 40% chance of a rate increase at the Fed's meeting next month, after Dallas Fed President Lori Logan said the case for pausing isn't yet clear. Just a few weeks ago, the bond market was convinced that the Fed has ended its most aggressive tightening cycle since the 1980s amid the regional bank turmoil, and the next move would be a cut, as soon as July. If it materialized, such a cut would mark the quickest policy reversal, from tightening to easing, since then Fed Chief Alan Greenspan slashed borrowing costs in the aftermath of Black Monday in October 1987. Over the last few weeks though, small banks have shown signs of stability while economic data such as retail sales, suggests the economy is holding up well. Inflation, meanwhile, is cooling, but remains more than double the central bank's 2% target. The weekly fix. Until inflation comes down more, bond bulls who are betting on rate cuts will have to bide their time. Hedge funds love tech. It's notable the extent to which the stock market this year has been dominated by a small group of tech companies. Exhibit A. 3 companies, Apple, Microsoft and Nvidia, contributed to 60% of the S&P 500's gain this year. Exhibit B. While the Nasdaq 100 index has rallied a whopping 26% this year to date, the Russell 2000 index of small caps has largely been flat. And that is good for hedge funds that have positioned for the sizzling tech rally. The combined value of hedge funds and institutional investors holding in Facebook parent Meta Platforms Inc. rose $8.5 billion in the first 3 months of the year. The combined value of hedge funds and institutional investors holding in Facebook parent Meta Platforms Inc. rose $8.5 billion in the first 3 months of the year. The second largest increase after Occidental Petroleum Corp., according to filing data. Nvidia Corp., Salesforce Inc. and Netflix Inc. were also among the names institutional investors bought. Billionaire investing titans Stanley Druckenmiller and David Tepper loaded up on stocks benefiting from the artificial intelligence boom, including Nvidia, a chipmaker that's been a key beneficiary of the increased interest in AI. Bonus points. Bank of America touts cheap lottery tickets for debt ceiling tail hedge. China's economic recovery is
European gas tumbles below €30 for first time since June 2021. European natural gas futures slumped below €30 for the first time since June 2021 in a stark reversal of last year's market chaos and a sign of tepid demand as Europe recovers from its energy crisis. The region has amassed high stockpiles after a mild winter as it rushed to import liquefied natural gas and curbed consumption. But demand remains weak amid an uncertain economic outlook and a seasonal lull. Prices are now less than 10% of their peak levels after Russia curtailed supplies to the region in the fallout of its invasion of Ukraine. They're near the 5-year average, though many consumers are still reeling from the market shocks of the past year. Still, the global market remains tight. There's a risk of quite an overreaction in prices if there are sudden changes in supply or currently depressed demand, Chris O'Shea, Chief Executive Officer of Centrica plc, the UK's biggest energy supplier, said during a call with analysts Thursday. The recovery has been uneven across the region, and some gas users are still subject to energy contracts set when prices were higher, meaning there could be a lag in relief in energy bills. Traders also are eyeing the prospect of higher demand for electric generation in the summer months. Market outlook. Central and Northern Europe are set to see warmer weather next week, with Berlin and Helsinki among the cities seeing unusually high temperatures, forecaster Maxar Technologies Incorporated said in a report. A sharp rise in the mercury could lead to higher gas demand to power air conditioning. Over the next few days, much of the continent will remain cooler than normal, however, according to Maxar. A drop in Europe's gas demand last year was steeper than we saw in the pandemic, and so far 2023 consumption remains below the norm on subdued industrial output, mild weather and a recovery in renewables, Bloomberg intelligence analyst Patricia Alvarez said on Twitter. Europe's inventory levels are already above 64%, and the rate may near 90% around August, much earlier than normal, said Jonathan Stern, Distinguished Research Fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. I would expect prices to keep falling, particularly as storage fills up, as long as nothing unusual happens with the weather, supply or Asia demand, he said by email. Dutch front-month gas, Europe's benchmark, settled 6.8% lower at €29.79 per megawatt-hour. The UK equivalent fell 7.1%. German front-month power declined 2.3% to €87.56 per megawatt-hour. LNG wrap, Asia prices. Natural gas prices surge on signs of tightening U.S. supply. Natural gas futures soared to the highest in more than 2 months as a smaller than expected U.S. stockpile increase stoked concern about tighter supplies, spurring traders to exit bearish bets. Gas rose as much as 11% after government data showed that inventories expanded by less than forecast last week. The report came just days after a separate tally showed a collapse in the number of rigs drilling for the fuel, signaling that producers are pulling back after this year's plunge in prices. Cheap gas is also stoking demand for the fuel, with power generators boosting consumption to the highest seasonal levels in at least 9 years. Warmer than normal temperatures through the end of May are expected to keep gas demand elevated as consumers begin to crank up air conditioners. Gas is staging a turnaround after a mild winter, and ample stockpiles in the US and Europe sent prices tumbling about 50% from the beginning of the year. But US inventories remain above normal, leaving the market vulnerable to a sharp pullback unless a hot summer materializes in the Northern Hemisphere. While storage figures were certainly a shocker and chased some shorts from the market, there's limited upside for prices in the near term, said Gary Cunningham, a director at risk management firm Tradition Energy. We should see some producers come in to help supply the short covering, which should limit any real rally. Euros use in international payments drops to 3-year low. The euros used for international payments dropped in April to the lowest in 3 years as those using the US dollar ticked up and the Chinese yuan's share rose to the highest in 5 months. Data from the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications or SWIFT, showed the proportion of cross-border transactions involving Europe's common currency fell to 31.74% of the total in April from 32.64% in March. Dollar usage climbed further to 42.71% from 41.74%. The share of the dollar continued to expand following the collapse of several U.S. lenders and concerns around Switzerland's Credit Suisse Group AG that ultimately led to its acquisition by UBS Group AG. Oil falls as traders raise bets on further Fed rate hikes. Oil edged lower as the potential for additional rate hikes from the Federal Reserve underpinned concerns about a recession that would weaken demand. West Texas Intermediate settled below $72 a barrel after Dallas Fed President Lori Logan said the case for a pause next month isn't clear, raising expectations of an economic slowdown. Also looming over sentiment are the negotiations to increase the U.S. government spending limit and avoid a catastrophic default. Crude is really struggling to keep up with other risk-on assets, said Rebecca Babin, a senior energy trader at CIBC Private Wealth, attributing the move to a potential interest rate hike in June. To get Bloomberg's Energy Daily newsletter direct into your inbox, click here. Crude prices have fallen about 10% this year as China's slower than expected recovery from COVID-19 restrictions disappointed markets. UBS Group AG was the latest to trim its bullish oil price forecast, lowering its year-end outlook for Brent to below $100 a barrel. That still implies a rebound in prices from current levels, with the bank forecasting a 1.5 million barrel a day market deficit in June. The world's demand for oil climbed by 3 million barrels a day to hit a record in March, according to the Riyadh-based International Energy Forum. In Asia, Refiners in South Korea and Taiwan recently snapped up millions of barrels of U.S. crude, while India is considering refilling its strategic hoard. Elsewhere, Angola's crude exports are set to rise to 1.2 million barrels a day in July.
Les États-Unis effectuent des importations rares de blé en provenance d'Europe après que la sécheresse a ravagé les cultures. Deux cargaisons de céréales polonaises sont arrivées en Floride cette année, tout cargoes of Polish grain. Deux cargaisons de céréales. Les agriculteurs américains abandonnent les cultures au rythme le plus élevé depuis un siècle. US Farmers are abandonning crop. Les États-Unis ont recours aux achats de blé européen après qu'une sécheresse a bouleversé les marchés des cultures, poussant les prix locaux à la hausse. Au moins 2 cargaisons de céréales polonaises sont arrivées en Floride cette année, et d'autres sont attendues au cours des prochains mois, selon des personnes proches du dossier, qui ont demandé à ne pas être identifiées car les transactions sont privées. Le manutentionnaire de culture Andersons Inc. a fourni le blé à l'usine de farine d'Ardent Mills à Tampa, ont déclaré les gens. Les rares importations sont un coup dur pour les États-Unis, qui ont perdu leur pertinence sur le marché mondial du blé au profit du premier expéditeur, la Russie. La sécheresse de l'année dernière a entravé la navigation sur le fleuve Mississippi, rendant plus coûteux le transport des récoltes par chemin de fer. Le temps maussade signifie également que les agriculteurs américains sont sur le point d'abandonner les cultures de blé au rythme le plus élevé depuis plus d'un siècle, ce qui rend les transactions rentables. C'est une route commerciale inhabituelle, mais elle est logique car le blé américain est cher, a déclaré Miroslav Marciniak, analyste de marché chez Info Grain à Varsovie. Il est moins cher pour les transformateurs américains de la côte est d'expédier des céréales depuis l'Europe que de les transporter depuis le Kansas. Les contrats à terme sur le blé d'hiver rouge dur à Chicago ont chuté jeudi après que Bloomberg Les contrats à terme sur le blé d'hiver rouge dur à Chicago ont chuté jeudi après que Bloomberg News ait annoncé les importations, chutant jusqu'à 4,5%, la plus forte baisse depuis début novembre, à 8,4 575 $ le boisseau. American Hard Red Winter Wheat, the variety used in all-purpose bread, has been trading at a wide premium to crops from other major global suppliers.
Meanwhile, some Eastern European nations are American hard red winter wheat, the variety used in all-purpose bread, has been trading at a wide premium to crops from other major global suppliers. Meanwhile, some Eastern European nations are saddled with surpluses, which recently sparked restrictions on imports from war-torn Ukraine. The wide price gap has allowed for deals to be struck for supplies of wheat from some European countries to be shipped to the US through at least October, one of the people said. The deals also allow for the grain to be delivered to another Ardent Mills facility in Albany, New York, the person said. Anderson's chief executive officer Pat Bowie said imports from Europe make sense given the price difference, but declined to comment on whether the company had done any such deals. Ardent didn't respond to a request for comment. Farmers set to abandon U.S. wheat crops at highest rates since 1917. Trade data from the European Union show Poland has shipped about 79,000 tons of wheat to the U.S. so far in the 2022-23 season. More such cargoes from the Baltic to the U.S. are likely given the price spread, Marciniak said. U.S. wheat imports are forecast to climb to a 6-year high in the 2023-24 season, U.S. Department of Agriculture said last week. Years of dry conditions in the U.S. plains have taken their toll on America's famed wheat fields. Some plants this season were so stunted by a lack of moisture that they won't produce so-called heads of grain, leaving little reason to harvest them. USDA expects poor U.S. winter wheat crop. Estimate is for only 67% of planted acres to reach harvest this year, the lowest ratio since 1917. Source: U.S. Department of Agriculture. U.S. farmers may only harvest 67% of their winter wheat planted acres this year, the lowest ratio since 1917, the USDA estimates. The Wheat Quality Council's annual crop tour of Kansas fields wraps up Thursday with final yield and production estimates for the country's top wheat state. Data collected on the second day of the tour show average yields below the USDA forecast. With assistance by Megan DeRise.
Ukraine grain export deal extended for another 2 months. A deal allowing Ukraine to export crops from key ports via the Black Sea will be extended by 2 months, a relatively short time frame that leaves open the question of what happens beyond that period. The agreement keeps open a major trade route amid Russia's war in Ukraine and bolsters global food supplies. Moscow had threatened to withdraw from the deal if obstacles to shipments of its own crops and fertilizer weren't removed. Wheat futures slumped 4.4% by 4:42 p.m. in London. Corn, the top commodity shipped under the initiative, declined 3.9%. While an extension keeps the agreement alive for now, dysfunction among the parties has blunted its effectiveness. Ukraine has said Moscow is purposefully slowing the pace of exports, and the shipment corridor through the Black Sea is now nearly empty, with no inbound vessels cleared since early May. The pact, brokered by Turkey and the United Nations, was initially intended to run for 120-day periods, but Moscow previously only agreed to a 60-day extension in March. A shorter extension period creates more uncertainty for traders and shipowners, who are wary of their vessels getting stuck if the deal expires and the journey is incomplete. We welcome the extension of the grain initiative's operation, but we stress that it must operate effectively, Oleksandr Kubrikov, Ukraine's infrastructure minister, said on Facebook. For that, it is necessary to eliminate the problems that Russia has been creating for several consecutive months by sabotaging inspections and a new fleet's registration. Russia's foreign ministry confirmed the pact's extension, the Interfax news agency reported. Still, ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said distortions in the implementation of the grain deal and a parallel agreement on removing obstacles for Russia's own exports should be removed as quickly as possible, according to Interfax. Ship inspections. Transportation of crops through the trade zone has been hamstrung by repeated disruptions in the joint inspections of vessels. The pace of ship examinations going forward will be crucial for Ukraine's ability to offload its next harvests, with wheat collected from July. Restrictions on other export routes via the European Union have added to the hurdles for local farmers. Several Eastern EU countries have sought to limit crop trade with Ukraine, claiming the flows are harming their own growers. Despite Moscow's grievances, Russia is expected to ship record volumes of wheat this season, while its exports of fertilizers are climbing back to pre-war levels. The agreement has enabled the safe shipment of about 30 million tons of crops since it was inked in July. July 2022. That has helped bring down global food commodity prices that had spiraled to a record in the aftermath of Russia's invasion. China and Spain rank among the top destinations for Ukraine grains. The extension also comes at a crucial time for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is seeking re-election in a runoff vote on May 28. As one of the original mediators that helped broker the deal last year, Erdogan has used his role in the negotiations to portray himself as a global leader and boost his appeal to the electorate. In addition to the extension, our Russian friends stated that they will not prevent the exit of Turkish ships in Mykolaiv and Olvia ports in Ukraine, Erdogan said in a Twitter post. We are grateful to them for this. Farmers set to abandon U.S. wheat crops at highest rate since 1917. America's wheat fields have become so plagued by drought that farmers are now poised to abandon crops at the highest rate in more than a century. Producers are expected to harvest about 67% of their planted acres, the U.S. Department of Agriculture said Friday. If realized, that would be the lowest harvest ratio since 1917, the agency said in a monthly report. Years of dry conditions on the U.S. plains have taken their toll on America's famed fields of grain. Some wheat plants this season were so stunted by a lack of moisture that they won't produce so-called heads of grain, leaving little reason to harvest them. Farmers can instead file crop insurance claims for failed acres, or choose to plant something else. Next week, an annual tour in the top wheat-growing state of Kansas will allow analysts to survey fields and make production estimates. We'll see short wheat, thin stands, some wheat that looks really good and a lot of fields that aren't going to be harvested, Justin Gilpin, Chief Executive Officer of the trade group Kansas Wheat, said of next week's crop tour. The USDA forecasts that the high rate of abandonment will drag U.S. wheat supplies to lower levels than analysts were expecting. That could keep domestic prices elevated, even with rival producers such as Canada and Argentina likely to boost output. Futures of hard red winter wheat, the variety grown in drought-struck states including Kansas and Oklahoma, surged as much as 6.9% after the data was released. That's the biggest intraday gain for the most active contract since October. Read more, USDA WAST crop report for May, top live transcript. Meanwhile, corn production in the U.S. is expected to rise to a record, bringing up global grain supplies and giving relief to livestock producers hit by rising feed costs. Corn futures were little changed. Traders were forced to exit short positions after the shocker wheat production estimate, Charlie Cernatinger, head of grains at Merrick's Capital, said in a note.